Okay. Okay, so I actually want to start today, even if you were with us for the first session in this series a couple of weeks ago, that's great. I want to recap a couple of things. First of all, almost all the texts that you'll see today are from Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers. So just to remind you what that text is and where that comes from, in about the year 200 of the Common Era in northern Israel or Roman Palestine, the rabbis and probably 100 years before that, kind of sprang up as a group after the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans. The rabbis developed as sort of this elite sage class, elite intellectual class that essentially redeveloped and recreated Judaism. I'm not going to go into a lot of historical detail about that right now, but if you want some, excuse me for one second, reading suggestions, I definitely can share that with you. So just to situate when we explore the text together so that you have in your mind, okay, these texts come from about the year 200, maybe a little bit earlier, from the early ancient rabbis in northern Israel. So one more piece about Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot is very unique within the text that it comes from. The Mishnah is the first rabbinic text, and it's a series of legal disputes and opinions about a very wide array of subjects, ranging from blessings to what we refer to as family purity, to sacrificial laws. The rabbis spoke and pontificated as if their world still had a temple, or as if the temple would be rebuilt. So we also have those laws. Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, is essentially wisdom literature, the rabbis' wisdom about life outside of generally very specific legal opinions. So it's a very unique text that might have been added on to the Mishnah. We don't know for sure. And that's our focus. Our focus is on the sort of life experience and the wisdom of the rabbis and what it has to teach us. And last time we spent quite a bit of time thinking about ourselves and ourselves in relation to community. And I put up for you on the screen here some overarching principles like having a higher purpose, approaching our relationships with a sense of peace and wisdom, and a lot of other things like grounding ourselves in our actions and good deeds. There were a few texts that really emphasized the interpersonal and the primacy of the interpersonal, perhaps even over the ritual. And then you can see some very specific commandments that I listed here. And I can also make a copy of this document so you can have that as your summary from the week before from Mara when she sends out our documents for today. So with that review, I want us to begin our study together today about learning and Torah learning and the rabbi's ideas, building on what we did last time about interpersonal and intrapersonal skills. What I want us to think together, what are the messages that the rabbis have to share with us about learning and about our connection to Torah today? What messages did they record back in about the year 200, and how does that affect us today? And even more specifically, how is this related to what we learned last time? So I will certainly share my thoughts about those. There are 4 or 5 sections in the document you have in front of you. I'll give you an overview in just a moment. I'm going to pause after each one so that we can take 1 or 2 questions or reflections. And those of you who have studied with me before know that a learning experience for me doesn't only mean my sharing with you texts and my own ideas. It means all of us learning from each other. So we'll do a little bit of that too. So with that said, here's an overview of what's in this document. And I know there are many of you in there, which is great. So you may have scrolled through already. So we're going to go through just some general ideas about the culture and the values of Torah and religious learning. What is that all about? What does it mean to study Torah? And we'll dive in a little bit more after that to, well, what does it mean even more deeply? What are some specifics about Torah and learning? And maybe even we'll get to some observations about learning in general. And then we'll end on what I called the meta here, as I did last time. Sort of, what does this all say in general about Torah learning and our connection to learning and Judaism? So that will be our final. There's some concluding notes here. Try not to look ahead. I kept the concluding notes in the document. Sometimes I manage to keep them out of the document and copy and paste them at the very end of the session. So try not to look ahead all the way to the end if you can help it. So I'm going to go ahead and read text 1, talk a little bit about it, and try and do the same for texts 2, 3, and 4. And I might ask for some of you to jump in and do some reading also. The first text, I'm going to read and then explain a little bit about what you might find, what we find in here. Some of you may be familiar with some of these references and some of you may not be, so I am going to go ahead and explain some of them. So Moshe received the Torah, it should really be capitalized, at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua, to his assistant, who we read about at the end of the Torah, and also he has his own book named after him, Joshua. He led the conquering of the land of Israel, as the story goes. Joshua then passed on the Torah that he received to the elders to the prophets to what's called the men of the Great Assembly. They passed it on to Shimon the righteous, Simon the tzaddik. I'm mixing Hebrew and English there. Then they passed it on to Antigonus of Socho, and he passed it on to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, who then received it from Hillel and Shammai. I skipped, you can see I skipped some specific names just to get to some of the main ones. So what is this all about here? There is this tradition that the rabbis lay out for us that, as I said at the beginning, the rabbis really essentially recreated Judaism. They do not want to see themselves that way. They do not want to see themselves as originators or creators, although they are very playful and creative in the plethora of rabbinic passages that we have. The rabbis see themselves as inheritors of what we refer to as the oral Torah or the spoken Torah. So not only did Moses receive the Torah, the written Torah at Sinai, says this tradition, but also he received everything that the rabbis ended up writing down. Moses actually got from God, things that weren't so clear in the Torah, like expansions on the laws of keeping kosher or expansions on the laws of keeping Shabbat. The tradition goes that Moses got all those oral traditions that were not written down, would have been too much to write it down, and passed it on from one generation to the next. And without going into great detail here about who each of these people were, I will share with you that the men of the Great Assembly, the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, is considered kind of an early organized body of sages who made some key decisions. Like some of you may be familiar with the Amidah, the daily standing prayer, and recited 3 times a day. The tradition is that the men of the Great Assembly wrote that prayer. And there are some other things related to that organized body of religious decision makers. And then Yochanan ben Zakkai, you can see he's the last figure mentioned here. The second to last pair is Hillel and Shammai. Hillel and Shammai are considered, and they're going to come up again in our study today, some of the most famous pairs, one of the most famous pairs of learning just before the destruction of the temple. I think I mentioned them last time too, dated to about 30 BCE. Yochanan ben Zakkai, you can see, has this title Rabban, which is a title that rabbis or sort of sages got in this transition from temple times to post-temple times, as the rabbis grew into an actual group of people called rabbis. You can see the word here is Rabban, sort of our rabbi, but it's a little bit of a different title than rabbi. I share with you all that detail just so the text doesn't feel terribly opaque, but really what I want to express here based on the text is there's this idea that, again, the rabbis were not originators of their ideas. They stood on the shoulders of giants. And I want us to think about for ourselves today this value of saying, of not only citing a teaching that we've heard from someone else and not claiming it to be our own, but also the sense of acknowledging who we've learned from. My mom is on this call. She's had a lot of wisdom to share. I had really special teachers growing up who had a major impact on me. I learned from them. And here the rabbis say, we learned from our predecessors. We are not creating anew. There's this tradition of appreciating and acknowledging what came before us, the teaching and the learning that came before us. So that's I think actually those are a lot of big ideas right there, but I do want to keep going in this section so we can pause in a little bit. And I'll say here that this, I think the material from today, maybe no accident since we're talking about learning, is a little bit more intense, heavy, not negative heavy in any way, but there is a lot to think about here. And again, no accident since we're talking about learning and teaching. So I'm going to go ahead and keep going, and then we'll come back to this group of texts as a whole, and you'll have the opportunity to pause and reflect and maybe voice your questions out loud too. So the next text, and you'll see all these different rabbis are being named, said Rabbi Hananiah ben Okasha, it pleased the Holy One, blessed be he, or the Holy One, the Blessed One, to grant merit to Israel. That is why God gave them the Torah and commandments in abundance. As it was said, God was pleased for his own righteousness to make Torah great and glorious. Not such an easy idea, but there's the sense here that God wanted to give the Torah, even in its abundant laws, stories, everything that we get, poetry, prose, narrative, all of the material in the Torah, it's connected somehow to God's righteousness, God passing on the Torah to us. The key idea, though, here, I think, is that the Torah is really a gift. We were gifted with this wisdom, and whether it's legal or narrative, the Torah was given to us as a gift. So far we have passing along the Torah from one generation to the next, acknowledging what came before us, and tying those two things together, acknowledging the gift that was given to us and that came before us and that was passed on from one generation to the next. So I'm going to keep going with the two more texts in this section. Again, sort of a lot at once, but we'll pull it all together shortly. Rabbi Nehorai says, go as a voluntary exile, go as a person go as a new person, sort of as a visitor, settle in a new place, a place of Torah, even if it's a city, an area that's not foreign to you, that is foreign to you. If there's Torah there, go to that place. For it is your fellow students who will make Torah permanent in your hand. A really interesting idea that we'll expand on. You can't do Torah on your own. Many of you might have heard at various times, Judaism is not something that we do on our own. We need community for it. Is there, of course, some balance? Yes, there's balance. And especially, I think in the modern day, there's so much each of us do on our own. I'm not sure that's a bad thing, but the rabbis are saying you really do need community. And specifically for the sake of learning, I'll mention here that the rabbis, we sometimes forget the culture of orality, meaning when the Mishnah, including Pirkei Avot, was originally written down, the Mishnah, we think, actually was first memorized. The word Mishnah actually means, and now I'm referring to the larger document that Pirkei Avot is from, it actually can mean either a piece of learning or a piece of repetition, or something, or a second piece of something, mishneh. So we sort of know that the rabbis and from other specific texts also, they spoke out loud. Writing is over accessible to us today, whether that's a pen or typing on our computers or our phones. There's an overabundance of the ability to write today. The rabbis were speakers aloud. They wanted a person to go to a place of Torah to help them with their learning. The rabbis recognized that when we speak things out loud, solidifies our own learning. And again, there's this line here that we sort of had from last time that I'm not going to attend to very much right now. Don't lean on your own understanding. You might remember from last time I said, don't only lean on your own understanding. So there's a sense of the rabbis want us to go to a place of Torah in order to be influenced by that community, be adopted by that community in a way, and so that we can immerse ourselves in those ideas. Okay, one more really beautiful text. And it's a bit long. There are some verses that are quoted. Rabbi Hanania ben Teradion said, if two people sit together and there are no words of Torah between them, then this is like a session of litzim or scorners. It's not a positive thing. If two people sit together, their conversation maybe can go in a critical direction. Torah can help people have a meaningful, a productive conversation. And then there's a verse that's quoted. I'm actually going to skip the verse for now, and I'll bold the sections that I'm going to read. You can read the verses on your own, but I want to keep us moving and in the big ideas here. If two people do sit together, there are words of Torah spoken between them, spoken between us, words of Torah. Then the Shekhinah, the presence of God, abides among them. And I will say here, in connection to this part of the idea, this part of the text, that there is a verse here that says, they who feared God, and by implication, studied Torah, and spoke with one another, God hears. And a book of remembrance, maybe more Torah is written. There's this idea of God's presence among those who fear God, and kind of by extension, God's presence exists. There's a spirituality that can enter our space when we speak words of Torah with one another. So just you can see the headers here of each text. Torah helps us gain in our sense of spirituality. There's the value of community, learning Torah with others, and experiencing Torah as a gift from God. And also, we started out with acknowledging that our ideas and our learning and our Torah learning comes from many other places. It doesn't just come from us. We acknowledge the people from whom we've learned. So those are some kind of essentials related to Torah, approaching Torah, all from Pirkei Avot. I want to pause here with these maybe seemingly disparate ideas and see if there are any clarifying questions or bigger picture questions or reflections that you might want to share. And I'll take one or two, and then we'll keep moving forward.
Abby, I think so far there's not too many clarifying questions. I think if anyone has anything, feel free to add to the chat. But for now, I think Abby, you're good to move on.
Okay. I just want to, Mara, if you don't mind, I just want to wait for just one moment and double check, since that was so much material that I just presented. So I'll just pause for a moment, give you a chance to scroll through on your own, or speak out loud, pose a question. As the rabbi said, when we speak out loud, it helps our own learning. I'll just pause for a moment. Okay, so as Mara said, we'll keep going.
Sorry, we just
We'll
got
shift.
someone.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, I'm ready.
Randy says, if you can't say it's your own learning ever, can't you get stuck?
Yes. Which is why I would never say that that is the conclusion of the rabbis, because as you can see in Pirkei Avot itself and in many rabbinic texts, we cite, one rabbi is cited after the next. So we do say that we are certainly permitted and should embrace having our own ideas and sharing our own ideas. There's a balance when we do have an idea from someone else, we should be sure to quote it or cite it. And sort of on a more meta level, we should acknowledge that our learning comes from people from many generations before us or from our own teachers. So there's a balance here. And even, Randy, in the text itself, there are these ideas that every single rabbi speak to each other all the time, and they're not always quoting someone else. So of course, it's a balance. Okay, so we'll keep going into our next section of teaching and learning about the rabbinic ideas of Torah, and then connecting that to what that has to do with our own lives today. So the first text here in this section is text number 5, about machloket, or disagreement or dispute. As you can see, I wrote a couple of preview notes that I wanted to mention. I already spoke about Hillel and Shammai, these pre-destruction of the temple sages from about 30 BCE, a pair of learners that eventually they were two different schools of learning that constantly kind of argued with each other, had very different, or I should just say different positions within Jewish law. And so they will be mentioned in this text. And also Korach, who you can read about in the book of Numbers, which we just started. Korach is a rebel, someone who poses a rebellion against Moses and Aaron and their leadership. And he is looked askance upon not only by the Torah text itself, but also by the rabbis. So he's mentioned in here. Every dispute that is for the sake of heaven will in the end endure, but one that is not for the sake of heaven, in Hebrew, l'shem shamayim, will not endure. Which is the controversy that is for the sake of heaven? Such was the controversy of Hillel and Shammai. And which is the controversy that is not for the sake of heaven? Such was the controversy of Korach and all his congregation. The rabbis are saying here, when we have disputes within Jewish law, generally speaking, and Hillel and Shammai modeled this for us, we should aim for them to be for the sake of heaven, meaning for a larger purpose, so that when we're thinking about Jewish law and Jewish practice, it's all in the context of how do we best serve God? How do we best serve others? How are we at our best? We can argue about that all we want, as long as it's for the sake of heaven, for a greater purpose. But if we catch ourselves and we're being provocative, in Hebrew, we say in modern Hebrew, there's a word lahachis, to make someone angry, to provoke someone. If that's the motivation of our question, we should really hold back and try and gather ourselves together and consider, doing continual work on ourselves. So that's not the motivation. The motivation should not be to be provocative in a negative way. The motivation should be to think about, when I'm arguing, is there a greater purpose here? So another tip, another tool that the rabbis want us to use, you may have heard this one before, is appoint for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a companion. There's a bit of commentary on what that means to actually acquire for yourself a companion. I think the rabbis are saying with great seriousness here, you really want to make sure as a learner in your own life, you have teachers. Maybe not only one teacher, maybe one main teacher and other teachers, but you have people that you can learn from, and you have people that you can bounce ideas off of, someone that you feel has greater learning from you, and someone that you feel is somewhat on par with you. And that is a major part of learning, in addition to making sure our learning is serving a higher purpose, and arguing as part of our learning is serving a higher purpose. And one of my favorite Mishnayot, one of my favorite rabbinic passages, partially because the name of the sage here that you can see is not a rabbi, but his name is Ben Bagbag. So you can't really get better than that for the name of a sage. Ben Bagbag says, turn it over and turn it over again. He's talking about the Torah here. For all is therein. Everything is contained within it. And he goes on, look into it, look into the Torah, and become gray and old therein. You do not move away from it, for you have no better portion than it. So if you're a Hebrew reader, you can take a look at some of that interesting Hebrew there. This idea, two ideas here, I think. One is pedagogical, and I'm actually gonna tell a brief story in a moment that I don't know if my mom will remember, but I remember like it was yesterday. There's this idea here that you have to review. Some learners have photographic memories. Some people can learn something and then they just know it. For me, and maybe for others, I have to review all the time. Even if I taught something yesterday and I'm teaching it tomorrow with a day in between, even consecutive days, I have to go over it. I can't just go in cold. And before I go on to the more meta point here about Torah, so I'm going to stick on that first part of the Mishnah. When I was in 6th grade, I went to a Jewish day school, and one of the teachers I mentioned earlier was my teacher, and I was having a hard time memorizing. He wanted us to memorize the meaning of the Hebrew and be able to translate it easily into English. And his name was Rabbi Cohen. I think he died about 10 years ago. I was very close with him for many years. And he told my mom at parent-teacher conferences that all I had to do was take a loose leaf piece of paper and 4 times on one side of the piece of paper write the Hebrew, and on one side write the English, and then I would know it. And he was so right. All I had to do was review, but not just review out loud, use the tool of writing. And the rabbis definitely valued the tool of the auditory ways of learning, but also the visual way of learning. The repetition combined with the visual is extremely impactful for many learners. And that kind of repetition I pass on to all my students. And I often quote my teacher, who had a major impact on me and helped me become a better learner. So I don't know if my mom will remember that, but I really remember like it was yesterday. Because I think I always knew I would be a teacher. And so I felt a special connection to that kind of tip about learning. The other piece that I wanted to share in here that the rabbis want to share with us is, and we're going to come back to this at the end, that every time we approach Torah, every time we approach our sacred text, even our rabbinic text, there's something new in there for us. Everything is in there, and one year a verse might mean one thing to us. The next year, depending on our life experience, the verse could mean something different to us. A word, a phrase, a verse, an idea changes over time based on what we bring to it. So another observation here combines in this Mishnah is a very practical pedagogical tool. Don't forget to review. You'll learn better if you review. And on top of that, this expression that everything is in the Torah. I'm going to read a little bit more, and then I will pause for questions. I think I saw someone raise their hands before, so I will pause in just a moment. I mentioned last time about either I mentioned or it's in the source document. I can't remember. You can see I didn't look at it right before our learning today, so I don't remember exactly what was in there. The rabbis have this value of learning from everyone. And one of the things that they say, I'm going to say it by heart, not read it for you, Ezehu Chacham, who is a wise person? someone who learns from everyone, someone who learns from kol adam, every person. And so here they say this in a little bit of a different way. One who learns from his fellow one chapter or one halacha, one Jewish practice or Jewish law, or one verse, one word or statement, or even one letter, sarich linhog bo chavod. We are obligated to treat someone from whom we learn with great honor. And the next two texts also related to learning. Rabban Gamliel used to say, a brute is not sin-fearing, an am haaretz, an ignorant person cannot be pious. Those are a little bit more troublesome. I didn't take them out. But for learning, mostly for our purposes today, they also say a timid person, someone who gets embarrassed, cannot learn, and an impatient person cannot teach. I want us to focus, and there is more here, but I want us to focus on this part here. The rabbis are saying, really, it's very difficult to learn if we get timid or we get embarrassed. And of course, there's a balance when we're in a huge class. Not everybody can say something, but asking questions is an essential part of learning. It's the key part of learning. And if we're not able to ask those questions, either out loud or use Google these days or ask a trusted friend or teacher, that will inhibit our learning and we won't be able to learn as much. And finally, not necessarily related to learning, but a larger context of working hard, still very much connected. The rabbis say, Ben, here's another great name, Ben Hehe Omer Lefum Sarah Agra. According to the labor is the reward. If you want more learning, work hard to get it. And of course, if you want more of anything, work hard to get it. So all these observations here, I want us to pause before we move on to kind of, as I call it, a little bit more, I've used this word a few times, more meta, more abstract, more bigger picture. So just to recap, and I invite you to kind of go through your own document, we've talked about hard work, bravery, learning from everyone, reviewing, finding a study partner, arguing for the sake of something much greater than the argument itself. And I'm going to go ahead and pause there and hear whatever, a couple of questions that you may have. So I see Claudette.
Yeah, we'll unmute Claudette, and there's just a lot of people in the chat mentioning and talking through their own learning styles. So I think that's great to reflect on that.
Great. Okay, Claudette, you want to go ahead and share your thought or ask your question? Oh, we cannot hear you. You need to unmute. Great.
I'm on mute. Would you say that when we go to a text year after year, there is, and we see it differently, it sometimes has something to do with the space that we're in, our maturity, or because, you can read that text one year and you can read that verse one year, but it didn't speak to you because your life experience didn't meet with it.
Yes, 110%, 110%. And I think that's what the rabbis mean when they say, let me pull up the text here. When they say, keep looking into it, allow yourself to grow old with it. Don't move away from it. There's no better portion than our sacred text that allows us to find ourselves in the text in different ways over the years that we're here visiting on the earth. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. And actually, Claudette, I'm going to add one more thing to this, and then I see Audrey has a question. Some of you might know the practice of giving a Devar Torah, offering a word of Torah, and sort of like a mini sermon. Being able to offer a Devar Torah is absolutely what we're talking about here, what Claudette raised, what she highlighted from this text. Taking a verse, looking at a verse, thinking about what our current questions are, where the verse is landing on us today, and then offering some words based on that verse to others and maybe connecting it to some other text. your Devar Torah on a Torah portion or on a section of a Torah portion 1 year could be totally different. Maybe even the opposite, depending on the verse from 1 year to the next. And so our embrace of text and our making the text of our own is doing that as part of a Devar Torah, our own words of Torah, which we all are able to offer, is a great expression of finding ourselves in different ways every time we visit a text in the Torah. So Claudette, thank you again. Thank you. Okay, I see Audrey's hand. So Audrey, if you want to go ahead and unmute.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having this great program right now. So I guess I was in the military, so I definitely understand the word bravery, especially in the Torah. Being a Jew, a Jewess in the military was not easy, right? And so as I go back into study, now that I have my own nonprofit and I'm out of the military, right? And I have this call to service to help my fellow veterans. You know, I'm starting to see things like in ancient Aramaic, how it translates very differently over to what we're studying, right? And how the interpretations have really changed. And then how we look at like how I will ask somebody like what they think is the story of Esther, right? And for me, as a military woman, I see this brave Jewess like just empowerment, right? But if you ask somebody what they have learned from it, they really just view it as a, you know, they remember maybe Boo Haman, right? They remember maybe she's a hero a little bit, but it seems like a lot has been lost in translation for the empowerment of strong Jewish women. And I'm starting to see like many strong Jewish women kind of get back into that and kind of share like how empowered we truly are. And so I guess that's what I took from your portion today in regards to bravery, just how, I mean, I'm seeing you lead this, right, about Torah. I'm seeing another strong Jewish woman here kind of like spreading the knowledge and the light in the Torah. And so it's just really encouraging to kind of see those things play out. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. And I appreciate your time. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Audrey, and thank you for your service to our country. Thank you so much for sharing and so beautifully. I do want to echo a little bit of what you said. The Book of Esther is one of my favorite books.
Mine too.
Okay, good. I'll also say, I'm sure you have, but the Book of Ruth is also what we read on Shavuot, and a key female character, and the story is very much about the central roles that women play, and even to take it a step further, the male characters at the beginning of the book, they all die off, and the women are left, and it is the women who play a role in perpetuating the story. And I won't go into more detail about the story, but really it's a beautiful story about the central role that women can play in one of our sacred texts. And in terms of seeing a text and seeing many of our sacred texts in the role that women play in them versus other ways to look at a text, I think you're underscoring actually this idea of looking at text in different ways. You know, many people might feel uncomfortable with looking at the female role models, raising up the female role models that we have in a text and saying, look at these incredible, strong female characters. That's not what they're looking for in Torah. And as you said, maybe many people would read the story of Esther and the story of Purim as, yeah, a story only, I'll add in the word only about the Jews and their survival and the diaspora and how it's always dangerous. And that's there, certainly, but also we get to study a brave female character from the Book of Esther. And also, by the way, the Book of Esther is an amazing character study into leadership and character. And if you take each character and their leadership style, it's really fascinating to take a look at that. One more related thing, so you got me on like a women in Torah topic. I actually taught for my Jewish learning at some point in the pandemic. I don't remember if it was like year 1 or year 2. I taught a series on women in the Hebrew Bible. You could likely find it on YouTube with the My Jewish Learning site. If you can't find it, let me know. I'll look for it and send it to you. But
Add
that
to the
idea,
follow-up as well.
okay, good. That look that a lot of us, I would say, I'm going to venture to say a lot of us might appreciate being able to look at our sacred texts and look at the women in the text and what we can learn from them. That is something that, you know, maybe wasn't done 25, 30, 40 and beyond years ago. So you've underscored the point in it with a beautiful example of turning the Torah again and again, not only in each of our own lives, but in generations of people who have studied our sacred text. So thank you. Okay, I see that I do want to keep our session moving, and I will pause again shortly. It's 1:45 and we're only on until 2. So I see that one person has a question. I'll ask you if possible. I'm hoping you'll get to share in a little bit. But for now, I am going to keep our session moving and we're going to explore a few more texts. Contrary to what I normally do here, I do want to just put in the chat, and I won't be able to read all of it, but I just want people to see the things that we've talked about so far, just in a major nutshell. Humility, the Torah is a gift from God, surrounding yourself with Torah in a community of Torah. Shekhinah, God's presence, a sense of spirituality with us, finding a study partner, reviewing, bravery, hard work. I just at a glance wanted us to see those things, to kind of meditate on them as we move on and learn a little bit more. So, and I'm also, I don't know why I wrote them in all caps for no reason, just that was my caps lock was pressed. So I'm just putting them here also, just so that they're in the doc and you can see them. And okay, so they're just there also, so you can have kind of top of mind, what are the things about learning that we've talked about so far, and being an effective learner, according to the rabbis, and an effective Torah learner. Okay, so actually, I should have put them a little further down, but here, as we begin our next section, there are a couple of texts here that we'll take a look at that are a little bit humorous. And for those of you who have studied rabbinic texts before, you know that the rabbis actually do have a great sense of humor, and it's kind of fun to see when that comes out in a text. So I'm going to go ahead and read text 11 and should be text 12. I apologize. I moved things around a bit as I was preparing. So the rabbis say there are 4 types of talmidim, students or learners. Someone who's quick to comprehend, but then quick to forget. The rabbis say that person's gain disappears and their loss. Why? Because the person who's quick to learn something, but also quick to forget something, well, overall, it's a loss. It's a net loss because we've forgotten something. Then the rabbis say a person can be slow to learn something and slow to forget. Well, I'll just finish there, that loss disappears in the gain. What does that mean? Well, if you're slow to learn something, but then you're slow to forget, it's not so great that you're a slow learner, but if you have information and experience implanted in your brain, that's a good thing too. So the rabbis say that's overall a net gain. And moving on, you'll see this is what they consider the best possible kind of learner, someone who's quick to learn, quick to comprehend, and slow to forget. That person is wise. And the word wise isn't used throughout here. So that's really considered the person of wisdom is a person who can learn quickly and forget very slowly. I would say, I don't know if that's most of us, as I shared with you at the beginning, at least for me. I'm not a super fast learner. I don't know if I review a lot, I'm slow to forget. But everybody, and I'm glad Mara mentioned, people are talking about their own learning styles. We all learn a little differently, and you may see yourself in this text. And finally, if you're slow to learn and then you're quick to forget it. That's the rabbis even use the word ra, which isn't the best word. It's especially with what we know now about neurodiversity, we think about learning and the continuum of learners much differently. So this is a moment where we'd say we don't take every single thing that the rabbis say to heart, but we appreciate the way they're thinking about different kinds of learners and neurodiversity in their own ways. And we can appreciate that they're saying certainly learning quickly and forgetting slowly, that is a great ideal. Maybe that doesn't fit who all of us, who each of us is, but it's a great ideal. And a little bit more here about different types of learning and learners. There are 4 types among those who sit before the sages: a sponge, a funnel, a strainer, and a sieve. I think I'm pronouncing that word correctly. A sponge soaks up everything. Like we know children learn like sponges, with language especially, they can soak up everything. A funnel takes in at one end and lets out at another. Not ideal for learning. A strainer, which is the rabbis seem to consider, I made a note here, which I don't see at the moment. I'm gonna actually pull it up. I want to have it in front of me. Yeah, they sort of see the strainer as having bigger holes and letting out the good stuff. And then a sieve, well, let me just read. A strainer which lets out the wine and retains the least. Like the strainer lets out the good and retains whatever. If you know anything about wine production, I'm no expert in that. So it retains the not such great part of making wine. A sieve lets out the fine negative parts, but allows us to retain the bigger pieces of flour. And that's for the rabbis also something positive. For them, it's ideal when we're learners who can just take it all in without a problem, but also second best is when we're able, and maybe even, one might argue, maybe it's even better to analogize a learner to a sieve, somebody who's able to discern and let go of what they don't need as much. I am going to keep going and then we'll pause. So we're kind of, we're nearing the end of this exploration of learning, and the rabbis have given us a lot of tips about what makes a good learner, an effective Torah learner. And now they're going to share, or I'm sharing with you some of their ideas that are a little bit more big picture. And also one text here, I just realized I'll renumber the text correctly. I'm realizing that I have to go through that one more time. I'll share one text with you that might be a little bit humorous, but sort of ends on a bigger picture note. So it says, the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God. Harut al haluchot, and this is from the rabbis have lifted here from Exodus 32 in the description of the tablets on which the commandments were written. The rabbis say that God somehow wrote those tablets. It was the writing of God, and it was engraved. And in Hebrew, engraved is harut, which I've noted in the next passage. The rabbis say, actually, when we speak about those tablets, don't read harut, graven, engraved, read cherut, freedom. Same word, different pronunciation. Same letters, different pronunciation. For there is no free man, but one that occupies himself with the study of Torah. And whoever regularly occupies himself with the study of Torah, he is surely exalted. This is, I think, aspirational, because Torah can, at least for the rabbis, give us some restrictions on our behavior, maybe even on what we think about God and other religious beliefs. It can, in some ways, restrict us, but the rabbis are asking us to think creatively. What are ways in which the Torah does allow us to feel a sense of freedom? And in fact, hinted in the word itself. Engraved is also some kind of sense of freedom. So I'll invite you to think about that a little bit. I'll share with you, once someone said to me, talking about observance and and keeping, observing, practicing Jewish law, sort of normative Jewish practice, let's say, that it's freeing for him. That person said it was freeing for him because he had the rules and then he could take it from there. For some people, it feels a little more restrictive, but the rabbis are inviting us to think about in what ways is Torah study freeing for us. So I'm gonna let you think about that. This next text I am gonna skip over, but I do want you to kind of see that it's a very, it's kind of a funny text where the rabbis assign different ages to different aspects of Torah study and Judaic study and life cycles, all in this one Mishnah. And you can see at first we read about a person at 10, 13, 15, and then we read in increments of 10. And just to kind of call attention to the second half of life, the rabbis say at 50, we are able to give advice, to advise people. 60 is considered old age, 70 fullness of years, 80 is the age of strength, 90 our bodies start to bend over, and at 100 we're as good as dead and completely out of the world. So that should bring you a little bit of a chuckle. Combines in this Mishnah both what are learning milestones. It's really the purpose of our seeing this Mishnah today, but I could not cut that. It's too funny. What are learning milestones? What are life cycle milestones? And what are aging milestones and more general milestones? I want to come back to the text here about everything being in Torah. And just read in Hebrew the section again. Uva techazeh, if you look into it, v'siv uvalev ba, and become gray, grow old with entering into it. Umina lo tazua, don't move away from it. She'ein lecha midah tova mena. There is no better portion than it. So just as sort of closing thoughts, in addition to, and I'm gonna scroll up to what I presented here, in addition to the things that we read that the rabbis want us to think about, being humble in life in general and in our learning, reviewing, being brave in our learning, working hard, but also bigger picture. And I'll just mention also finding a study partner, surrounding yourself in a community. Those are all great tips for learning and Torah learning. The rabbis want us to work hard. They want us to embrace Torah, and I would add in ways that work for us, but they also want us to be humble. They want us to experience a sense of spirituality, a sense of freedom that we just read about. And as we heard earlier from Claudette, who kind of highlighted this piece, the rabbis want us to turn over again and again and again Torah. So that it means something. We experience different kinds of meaning from Torah every time that we encounter it. So I do want to take one, maybe two questions here before we completely wrap up. And we'll see how much time we have for, if it's one or two. So I'm going to pause. I know it is 1:58. I'll pause and see if there is anyone who has a question or a reflection at this moment about anything that we've encountered today.
I will
my
just
gosh.
say that
Mira, okay, go ahead.
People are saying thank you in the chat, and translation has been a big theme of people looking at particular translations and coming to learn and relearn things through different translators. So I just wanted to call attention to that.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So let me just end again, and I'm kind of underlining for you here. And there's also a final text that I just could not include at the bottom that's really fun and lengthy that I'll keep in the source sheet that you can read on your own, that sort of brings together everything that we've done. But all these things that you see here, I think not only do we have an expansion of humility, the rabbis want us to walk through the world in humble ways, which was a key teaching when we read texts last week, specifically about grounding ourselves in ourselves and encountering other people with humility. So definitely in learning, the rabbis expand on that, but also give us these tips for great effective learning, both in Torah study and beyond. And also, I think, ask us to think about what kind of freedom does Torah learning or learning give us? How can we bring a sense of spirituality and presence, God's presence, to our learning, whether that's Torah learning or any kinds of learning that we do on a regular basis. So with that, I wish you happy learning and review. And next week, the focus will be on Pirkei Avot and other texts in connection to forgiveness. And so I will look forward to learning with you. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all. We'll send out a recording and the source sheet later today. Bye-bye.